Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Pavali, coming at you without my fantabulous co-host, Adam Frommel. I am, however, continuously excited to keep our team look-ahead train on the roll. The Washington Wizards are up next, and we brought on Quinton Mayo. He can be found on Twitter at Real Quinton Mayo. That's at RealQuintonMayo. He's the host of Bet MGM Tonight. He's an overall Washington Wizards insider, covers the team for Blue Wire Pods during the regular season, which is also the umbrella under which this podcast can be found. He is also covers basketball and betting at large for Odyssey. He does a lot, and he does it extremely well. We had a great conversation about all things Wizards heading into the season. Tackled, of course, Bradley Beal's future, all that good, important stuff. Before we get started, just the usual yet salient reminder to please continue subscribing, rating, reviewing Hardwood Knocks wherever you get your podcasts. We can be found everywhere. The subscriptions, the ratings, and the reviews, those help us out a ton. Whether you use iTunes or not, we also ask that you head over there, so long as you have access to it. Search Hardwood Knocks, throw us that 5-star rating, and write a review. It should take 10 to 15 seconds. You can even include criticism in the review, so long as you give us that 5-star rating. Those help us a ton in the charts. So I just want to reiterate that, as well as subscribing wherever you're getting your podcast and downloading episodes. If this is your first time checking out Hardwood Knocks because you're a die-hard Washington Wizards fan and need to consume all the Wizards content possible, maybe you're just really a fan of Quinton Mayo, which I get it. Perhaps you've just stumbled upon us accidentally. Consider throwing us that permanent subscription. We cover the entire NBA at large. We are pleasantly sub-mediocre, only half insufferable. It's a fantastic experience in my totally unbiased opinion. Follow us on Twitter at Hardwood Knocks. We can also be found on YouTube, youtube.com. Search Hardwood Knocks. We will show up. We are on Instagram as well at Hardwood_Knocks. With all of the business out of the way, or the unfun business, let's get to the super fun business of talking a bunch of Washington Wizards with Quinton Mayo. Quinton, thank you so much for coming on the Hardwood Knocks podcast. The first time that I spammed your DMs and you answered and you came on, and I am forever thankful for it already. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me first and foremost. And you say spam DMs like it was like you reached out multiple times. It was one time. I don't want people thinking you're thirsty in the DMs. I was very open and willing to hop on with you.
I think people who listen to this podcast know that I just feel like a perpetual infringement upon people's lives. So one DM is considered spam from my book.
I feel it.
I'm excited to talk about the Wizards. They had a pretty boring offseason. Nothing happened there.
Nothing major.
We have to start with the Russ trade.
Yeah.
What were your – I think the biggest theme has been everyone's excited or commended them for they're so flexible long-term. They can choose all these different directions. I'm curious where you land on that, but I also want to know how you feel about what it does for them in the present, because you can argue, hey, they lost a star, but they also really deepened their rotation by like 4 players as part of that transaction.
And we'll probably talk about this later, but it might be a little too deep. Like it's a lot of depth, and you got to get guys that can go out there and play. And they have a lot of guys in pretty much the same positions, but it did add a lot of flexibility to this team. I mean, that's undeniable. Coming into this offseason, we were saying, okay, well, Russ' contract, it's untradeable. Bradley Beal's making X amount of money. Davis is making $16 million a year. How can they take the next step and add a player that's good enough to really elevate the floor or the ceiling of this team? And it was hard. I mean, DeMar DeRozan was thrown around, but DeMar wants X amount of money. How does he fit in the cap? Is he going to take a pay cut? All these different type of players have been speculated, but for them to trade Russ, it was kind of a mutual thing. And actually, it was more on the Russ side because Russ wanted to play in LA. Like that's the fact of the matter. Russ wanted to go to LA and he wanted to win. He wanted to play some meaningful basketball. And what he did in DC will not be forgotten. I mean, watching Russ from the outside, you're like, man, he just goes so hard. Like you just think he goes so hard. He hustles harder than everybody else, and that's who Russell Westbrook is. But watching every single game from him here in DC, I'm like, this is not something I think we'll ever see again in the NBA. Like, it's so rare for somebody to play the game like he does, even with all the criticism. So it was time for him to go and, be in a place where he can chase a championship or win a ring and get that last, I guess, notch in his belt of, on-court accolades. So it was cool. It was a good trade. I mean, Kyle Kuzma, you get back Spencer Dinwiddie, Montrezl Harrell, KCP. I mean, the list just feels like it goes on forever. These are not just like young guys who haven't done anything. Kuzma, at one point we were talking about, I remember reading articles about, Kuzma was better than Jason Tatum, or Kuzma's ceiling is higher than X player, and all these different things, especially his first year in the league. And, he comes in with some experience of playing in LA and playing with those basketball players like Bron and AD, but now he's kind of at a point in his career where he has to have his own identity outside of that. I think he adds a lot to this team. Spencer Dinwiddie coming off the ACL. They got a lot of nice pieces. So I like the trade. I like that both sides worked on it. Brad and Russ did talk about it before it happened, and it was just like, hey, you ready? I want to go. Is that cool with you? I mean, this is what I'm thinking. And Brad was like, yeah, go do your thing. And it was kind of a shake hands, love you for life, and keep it moving. So the trade was cool. The team's flexibility is incredible. I mean, even if you are not bought into this team at the trade deadline or for whatever reason, if it's winning or not, you have some pieces that other people will actually look for. Last year at the trade deadline, people were talking about, oh, well, we could trade Davis, or we could trade Garrison, or we could trade this player. I'm like, those guys are cool if you're a Wizards fan, but outside of the DMV area, I don't think anybody's really clamoring to trade for those guys to take them to the next level. So now you have some pieces where, they're a little highly sought after, and especially in this situation, you could probably see more of what they can do because they have more free reign to operate in the offense and defensively.
The Spencer Dinwiddie edition, the first off, he's coming back from the partially torn ACL. Is he going to be under any significant limitations to start the season?
Not that I've heard. He looks the best. And we just talked about this before. This is the best he's looked since, before the ACL. This is the best, but he looks really good. I think I talked to his trainer, Olin Simplis, the guard whisperer, and that's also his uncle. And like the way he works is kind of freaky. Like, I know we talk about the players' work ethics, especially when you get to the NBA, it's just a different level of work, but he's been really grinding like 3 workouts a day, especially recovery and rehab, and seeing him in practice. He's been phenomenal. Like, I mean, talking to the players, talking to Brad, even talking to Spence, just he feels good. I don't think there'll be any limitations. He wants to play in preseason. Will we see him play in preseason? I think so. Maybe a couple games or one game towards the end part of that, especially because this team is, I think, mentally, all the injuries that they went through in past years and previous years, this is a big year for that organization. So you don't want any setbacks. But he looks good. I think I don't think he'll have any limitations in terms of playing time or things like that.
How do you like his fit with the roster? And I'm wondering when people see an ACL injury, knowing he's also had a previous ACL injury, all those red flags pop up. His game has never really been prided on a ton of explosion, and so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I am wondering if the offense ends up missing like that pure, raw rim pressure Russell Westbrook put on the basket, because you look at this, they have a ton of players on this roster now, and like, I don't know who their best guy to put pressure on. Is it Beal? Is it Aaron Holiday at this point? Because it doesn't feel like it's going to be Spencer Dinwiddie.
Yeah, putting pressure on the defense, or you're saying like pressure in the rebounding department of grabbing boards that Russ brought?
I'm sorry, like putting pressure on the defense around the basket. Okay. Like that reaction when he gets in the lane it's obviously unparalleled, but it feels like they don't have that like ball handler who's going to put a ton of that raw rim pressure on the opposing defense.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, like you said, Spencer's game is not necessarily finesse, but it's more of controlled. It's a smarter game. He has like a deceiving athleticism about him. He does play make well, so I think that is not anywhere near Russ's just sheer explosion downhill slashing play style. But you're right. I don't think they have like one player that can come in and give you what Russ did in that department. But one thing that they are going to try to do even more this year is just the ability to have like Daniel Gafford playing more extensive minutes and being the role man. But now you have more options around the perimeter that can help you keep that floor spread open to where, last year, they were playing, all defenses were just playing off of the threes. Like even Davis, who 2 years ago was probably one of the best 3-point shooters in the league, last year didn't even look like himself. People were just playing off of these guys. This year, you do have some talented perimeter shooting to where you get more one-on-one matchups, especially coming down inside the lane. I think Brad is also, his pressure inside the paint is really good. He's one of the more underrated finishers in the league, I believe. The mid-range game is literally his bread and butter right now. And we talk about, in terms of his scoring ability, he came to the league as a spot-up 3-point shooter. Like he was a knockdown 3-point shooter. That was his thing. he hasn't shot the ball well from three-point range probably the past 2 years. His numbers have steadily declined. Now, is that because of the fact that he's been probably the only option and he's had to do even more? Probably so, but this year he's a true 3-level scorer. I think he pressures defenses, and with Spencer Dinwiddie's playmaking, one thing I love from him is when he beats a man around the perimeter, which we'll have to see this year if he can do, because the ACL will alter the stop-start just a little bit, is the way he can just effortlessly find a cutting man, or his lob throwing ability. I mean, I saw it in Brooklyn. Like, it's crazy when you go back and watch these games. His vision is really good. So you got a rim running threat like Daniel Gafford. I think that helps out a lot. So nobody can just one piece can make up for Russell Westbrook. But I think, schematically and with the playmaking ability that they have around the perimeter, it should be able to do something.
Daniel Gafford was one of the players that I was worried about with Russell's departure because Westbrook assisted on so many of his buckets last year during that run where Gafford was spectacular for the Wizards. It does feel like Dinwiddie can be that. It's a different type of playmaking, but I do think that they can establish that connection. I am curious as to what you're looking for, or what the Wizards need to be looking for from Daniel Gafford in year 2 with him to actually, view him as the center of the future, because it was a relatively small sample size with which they were working last season after the trade deadline.
Conditioning. Last year, I mean, ask anybody around DC, you love Daniel Gafford, but he had problems finishing games. And that's probably because of the fact that he came from Chicago. He wasn't playing a lot of basketball. So he comes from Chicago. Now he's in a situation where, now I'm the starter? Like, now I have to be out here for this amount of time and they want me to close games. And the way he plays the game is so fast. He gives, he's sprinting up and down the floor. The bunnies are there. Like, his athleticism is through the roof, but you got to be able to finish games. So now coming into this season, all I've heard from, players and also coaching staff members is that he's the starting center. Like, he's the starting guy. Montrezl will come off the bench to relieve him at some point. Then, of course, Thomas Bryant is working back from his injury. He'll be back in the fold at some point. But Daniel Gafford has to be able to stay on the court and be and have that wind about him. He said he's been working on it this offseason. He said we can't really tell until he gets thrown into the fire, which is a great answer, because you can work and you do wind sprints, but you got to be able to go out there and show it in a real game-like scenario. So I think another thing that he's worked on this year is just also his jump shot. I mean, every center is working on their jumper. You want to be a more diverse basketball player. And I'm not saying he's going to go shoot 3 jumpers a game or anything like that, or ISO in the post over the left shoulder fade or anything of that nature. But, just being a more diverse basketball player. But what he did last year is something that has been needed in Washington since I don't know when. I mean, Marcin Gortat was probably the last real rim running threat. Wow. He's like a rim running threat, but he had an excellent finish around the rim and he could knock down middies. And since then, they haven't had a true Skywalker like Daniel Gafford. So play exactly how he played last year and then just be able to be available. Your best ability is availability, and you can't get taken out of games, in a 2-point game in the fourth quarter because you can't breathe. Like, that just can't happen.
Do you view him as someone who can be like a viable backline rim protector on the defensive end for them?
Yeah, I do. And it's kind of scary because I feel like when you do cover a team, you start to get closer to the guys and you get closer to the team to where you start thinking, maybe you think a little more highly of them than they are. But I feel like there's a true gem defensively in Daniel Gafford. I saw some plays and some blocks that he made last year on Zion Williamson at the rim that I haven't seen any guys make since I've been watching, whenever Zion actually plays basketball. Like, I've seen him play some good defense in a lot of tricky spots. I've seen him get beat, but take one stride from the free throw line extended into the block and get a chase down in the half court setting. Like, I've seen him do freakish things defensively. So, like I said, if he can have the win to do it, I think he's probably the best defensive center they've had in a long time. And I know that puts a lot of pressure on Daniel Gafford, especially so young in his career, but he has the tools. He just has to be able to put it together and stay out there on the court. Yeah,
his ability to cover ground north-south without a head start was like
crazy.
Charming.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources that were once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility. Believe me, my fishing company that I started 5 years ago with my best friend Aaron, called Woo Tungsten. Actually, it's pronounced Woo Tungsten. because that's the sound you make when you catch a giant fish. Woo! We started this company 5 years ago, November of 2016, and we've been on Shopify since day one. We sell tungsten fishing weights, and our business would be nowhere close to where it is today if it wasn't for Shopify making things so incredibly easy. And like mine, Shopify powers over 1.7 million businesses from first sale to full scale. You can reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. You can gain insights as you grow, and they have detailed reporting of conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is possibility powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/BlueWire. That's all lowercase for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/BlueWire right now. That's shopify.com/BlueWire. Shopify.com/BlueWire.
No team can afford to overpay for talent. Build a championship team with Indeed the smart way by only paying for quality candidates that meet your must-have requirements. Get started right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/BlueWire. When hiring gets hard, you need Indeed, the job site that makes hiring incredibly simple. Just attract, interview, and hire. In fact, with Indeed, you can do all of your hiring in one place, even interviewing. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/BlueWire. Indeed knows how important it is to make the most of your recruiting hours and dollars. With Indeed, you can save time and money by setting your must-have qualifications and only paying for the quality candidates that meet them. Indeed.com/BlueWire. Offer valid through October 31st. Terms and conditions apply.
In my quest to not make this podcast 8 hours long because they have so many new additions, sandwiching that together, aside from Dinwiddie, who ends up being, in your opinion, the most important or most impactful new player on this roster?
Man, I think it's honestly a toss-up between Kentavious, Caldwell-Pope, and Kyle Kuzma. And a lot of people haven't talked about KCP this offseason as much as Kuzma because I guess the name isn't as sexy as a Kyle Kuzma. Like KCP was never averaging,
less, I think is what it is too.
You said what?
KCP tweets less, I think too. Is what
absolutely. And he's not doing runway shoots and all that stuff. Even Kuz, everybody has a thing, and that's Kuz's thing. But KCP is more low key. But I think the veteran presence that he does bring to that locker room, and also just his ability to shoot. He's an underrated defender as well. They need perimeter defending. Last year, the perimeter defending of Washington was probably one of their most glaring issues. The pick and roll defense was huge. Like it almost made me throw up watching them. Like I was watching my analysis before this podcast, just watching some analysis from last year's team, and I was just like, this is the worst basketball I've ever watched defensively. And it's true. They need perimeter defenders. I think KCP can stretch the floor, knock shots down, and play some defense. But Kuzma is the wild card because we have seen Kuzma get real buckets. Now, defensively, that's another story, but we've seen Kuzma get real buckets to the point where I'm like, how does he fit into a Washington system where, the only time we've really seen Kuzma in his bag is when the offense was all his. Like there was nobody else there to step on his toes. How do you come into a situation now to where you're playing a second, third fiddle to a superior basketball player and you now have a defined role? In LA, it was like, okay, one night we need you to be the point guard. Next night we need you to go stand in the corner. Next night we need you to do all these different things. You have a defined role. You're the helper now. Like, can you still be impactful? Do you know how to be a role player, or are you always having your eyes set on being the superstar? That's the biggest question for Kuz. But I think he has the tools to be whatever he wants to be. He just has to know how to fulfill his role and do it with a smile. Like if you're not getting 17 shots a night, Kuz, but you're playing good defense and you give me 10, 15 points in a couple possessions where you're playing locked in defense, that's what this team needs. They don't need Kuzma to average 24. Like that's just not what they need.
What you said about KCP, I think is spot on because LA had one of the best defenses in the league last year, even when Anthony Davis wasn't on the court, and it was KCP was routinely covering some of the toughest option on the other team. I still think he was their third most important player when they won the title in 2020. So I think it's going to be him, especially based off what you said about Washington's perimeter defense. I do think there's the potential for it to be Kuzma because he has improved positionally on defense. And I'm probably not as low on you as you were on what he did like as a complimentary offensive player with the Lakers, except that I'm with you where he feels like this unformed offensive player still, where there was year one where he could score all those from scratch buckets. And then he hasn't really had the opportunity to do a bunch of that since then, but he also, when he's had the opportunity, hasn't done it well. And so I'm curious if you think, is Washington going to put him in more of the position, like you mentioned, to be predominantly more of a catch and shoot guy or play off others? Or do you think because the pecking order after Beal, after Dinwiddie could get a little spotty, do you think that they're going to ask him to maybe do a little bit more with the ball in his hands?
I do think so. So one thing Wes Unseld Jr. said when he came in is that he wants to take more off the plate of Brad. Like last year, it's just straight ISO basketball. Brad pin down, dribble handoff, straight DHO action. Like it's just boring basketball. We've seen it before. There wasn't a lot of ball movement. Wes has gone as far as saying less playing time for Bradley Beal, like in more off ball movement for Brad, and not just being the primary ball handler. And that fits perfectly into incorporating a guy like Kuzma, who needs both. Like he needs to know that he's offensively inclined and can go get buckets, but also know how to be that complement, how to set those screens and do those things, especially at his size. Like it's crazy. He's 6'10". Like it's kind of weird when you look at him on film. Like, is he really that tall? Like he's legit that tall. So I think with the new offenses being brought in, he'll have a lot of chances to have options. Like if he's if it's a dribble handoff, or if he has to set a screen, or if he has to initiate the next play, he can look at whoever's on him or get switched on him and say, "Oh, I can get a bucket real quick," and that allows the offense to be more free flowing and have more options. So I think he will get that opportunity. And also, we haven't talked about the fact that Rui Hachimura still hasn't reported to camp. Rui Hachimura is supposed to be a starter. And he's still not here. So, the last thing I heard that he's going through some taking care of his mental health. But if he doesn't show up to camp, it doesn't look like they're going to have a starting four.
Right.
Insert Kyle Kuzma. That's going to be a lot of responsibility from the break. I don't think Davies would get that start because Davies can't play any defense. But I think Kuzma is probably in that starting slot, and that's good for him, especially coming into this situation this offseason the way he did.
Do you see that front court rotation sort of shaking out for the Wizards then? And I guess there's the interim without Rui, and then long term, assuming Rui does eventually join the team.
It's so weird because the depth is crazy. Because when I look at it black and white, I tend to name names and forget that Thomas Bryant is coming back at some point.
Right.
Right now, we do have the fact that Daniel's going to start. Montrezl is going to be the backup, and then the 4 position you have probably, like you said, Rui's not going to be there. So Kyle Kuzma, and it's just. It's a weird situation. Davies is going to come off the bench as well, but is Davies going to come in and play the 3, or is he going to come in and play the 4? Because we can't really get a stronghold on who's going to play what. So if anything, I would probably assume, like I just said, Gafford, Trez at the 5 position, excuse me, and then you got Rui at the 4 when he comes back. Then coming off the bench, I think first off the bench would probably be Kyle Kuzma. And then Davies is still like an odd man out to where are you going to get minutes for a guy who's making the third most money on the team? Like that's why I said it's almost too much depth on this Wizards team for everybody to get minutes and be successful at that.
They feel like they're built to for a consolidation trade in the front court. I guess you could try. I don't know how you feel about this, playing a Rui and or a Kuzma more minutes at the 3 is how you open up minutes at the 4 for Bertans. I don't know that I like Rui at the 3. I don't even really like Kyle Kuzma at the 3, to be honest with you.
Same. And the thing with Rui, we've been talking about this for since Rui's been drafted, is that people say he has positionless potential, and I think his foot speed is way too slow to guard 3s. Like I think he's great at guarding 4s. Like that's your thing. Like he can maybe stick in there with 5s, but like his lateral quickness is not there. And what also it has to get factored into this whole dynamic is you're missing some valuable practice time and playing time the more minutes that you are out. So let's say he does come back after preseason. what time have you spent practicing guarding threes? What time have you spent practicing offensively, operating at the three position? Like, it's not just an easy switch. And it's funny that a lot of like more casual fans are like, oh, he can just play right here or he can just play right there. Well, that's a lifestyle change. Like that is a very different, like you don't just say, oh, I'm going to go from guarding, well, LeBron James is a very extreme example, but going from guarding LeBron to now guarding guards, like guarding DeMar DeRozan. DeMar would eat Rui alive in one-on-one situations and scenarios, and that's a three. So it's rough. It's a rough position to be in. I think Rui is a four, but yeah, you definitely could slide him up and down. I think I would have more faith in Kyle Kuzma to do that just because of what he has shown in previous years. Rui is still so young in his game, man. He still has a lot to work on to stay on the floor and to hold down that starting position, let alone moving positions up or down.
What do you see? Let's just assume Rui reports is healthy and everything. What do you see his future as on offense, like based off what he can do? When I've watched him, it's always felt when the ball's in his hands, it feels like there's a nice feel there, but I also don't understand what I'm watching a lot of the time, if that makes any sense.
No, that's the Rui experience so far. And one thing with Rui is that confidence is 90% of the battle. Like with anything, I think he's as skilled as anybody at that position at his age. I think he could do a lot of special things, but he just has to learn not to defer. And I think a little bit of that changes this year with a new coaching staff and a new system, because last year was just so much ISO basketball that guys are just like, all right, like I need to get Brad the ball and get out the way. This year it's like everybody, we want you to make your own decisions as a basketball player out there on the floor. And when Brad gives the ball to Rui, it has to be, all right, I'm at the left block. This is what I'm going to do. And if they can't stop it, I'm going to keep doing it over and over again. Sometimes he'll come out hot in the first quarter. If he doesn't get a few touches in the second, Rui disappears till maybe the second half. And you can't have that. He has to continue to be aggressive. But I think if he has the confidence and the aggression, the skill is right there. The length is there. I also would like to see him have a little more creativity around the rim. Right now, he's very linear. He's very straight up and down. I mean, even on fast breaks, I kind of know what he's going to do every time. He doesn't have a Euro step. He's just going to try to put his shoulder down and lay the ball up. He doesn't have any wiggle left to right. Some creativity around the rim. And that comes with just, growing in the league and knowing that you're not at Gonzaga playing against these, the younger guys, the smaller guys, where you can just power over them. You have to have a little more creativity and wiggle. So I think he's working on those things. And when he comes back, he'll have to display that. And I really wish he was in training camp right now with Wes, because Wes, his focus this offseason has been teaching the young guys. Like the vets are vets, and we can work on that. But he's been really breaking things down for the young guys, so their growth. Like, you're only as good as the last player on your bench. And I think Rui could really do well being coached by Wes, because Wes has been implementing a lot of good stuff for the younger guys.
You've now mentioned the new coaching staff a bunch of times, and that,
yeah,
I think you could argue
they pay me to say that. By the way, they pay me to say that.
Yeah. What material changes do you think we can expect to the way that the Wizards are playing under Wes Unseld Jr.? Because these coaches, the first time head coaching hires are always interesting, because there are people that are going to pretend they know what they're talking about with it. I have no idea what to expect from him. I know what I've heard about what he's done, what his reputation is, but I'm always, as someone who's just not super X's and O's to begin with, to have this new coach plugged in there, I'm very curious to see what's different about this Wizards team on the court under Wes Unseld Jr.
Yeah, we're going off of what we've heard so far, because, like I said, this is not just his first time coaching the Wizards. This is his first time being a head coach, like you just said, in general. So even what you did in Denver back when he was with Washington back in the day, how do you do that when you are the man? How do you walk in and implement whatever your vision is for the team? It's very it's a very fine line to tread, because you've never been in that situation. So watching him closely, I just know one thing that he has put an emphasis on is defense. Like, this team's defense, oh my gosh! I mean, I don't even know where to start. It makes me sick. The defense was that bad. It's crazy. And one thing that they did poorly last year is their pick and roll defense. They switched a ton. Like, they switched every time the screen comes in, they're switching. And when you have a lot of young players and then a lot of switching going on, it's so easy to get lost in the sauce. They're not going to switch nearly as much this year. Your man is your man. You are a capable defender. You stick in front of your man, and if you need help, let somebody know. But you're going to be on this island until we see that you can't anymore. So less switching is number one. More ball movement, more creativity. I don't think the NBA is ready to see this version of Bradley Beal off the ball. because he hasn't played off the ball since prime John Wall, and that was a very long time ago. So
that feels like forever ago.
It feels like forever ago. And seeing Brad off the ball, it's easy to guard Brad when you're watching him bring the ball up the floor. And then you get a screen set for him. You just got to stay in front of him. But like, what if you lose sight of him? He hasn't been able to move off the ball, pin downs and all those stuff in a very long time. And I think with that being the case now with other capable players and shooters and guys who know who they are as players, especially around the perimeter and that identity, they don't look to Brad and be like, all right, let me get Brad the ball. It's like, oh, I can get a bucket. Like, this is what I do. And that makes for a more widespread offense. Somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, I think I was on with Slam, and they asked about, will Brad average 30 again this year? I think Brad actually has the shortest odds or the best odds to lead the league in scoring this year. And I said, I think he could average 30 again this year. But if he's averaging 30, the team's not winning a lot of games because of the fact that he should not have to do that this year. If Brad gives you 25, 26, 27, that's where you want him to be, because a lot of these other guys are capable scorers. They're capable shooters, and they've shown it. It's not just off of what we saw in college or what we think they can do in film. They've done this. They're championship winners in this locker room that have operated at the highest level in an offense. So Brad keeping his number down, I think his points total is going to come down, but that's going to be perfect for what the Washington Wizards want, because it's a more widespread offense from top to bottom.
So we should expect to be more like an egalitarian approach, where there's obviously Bradley Beal at the top of the pecking order, even Spencer Dinwiddie, but it's not going to be as maybe heliocentric as it was last year.
Absolutely. You should never know. Like, it shouldn't surprise you if Kuz goes off for 25 one night, and then the next night, we're looking at Corey Kispert, who was their first round draft pick. People forget because there's so many names in this locker room. Corey Kispert knocks down 6 threes the following game, and he came off the bench. Like, I think when you drafted Corey Kispert, you assumed that he would probably be put into the starting lineup because they needed shooting that bad. Now it's like, dang, where does Corey Kispert fit? They still got Raul Neto. They got Aaron Holiday, who the guys in the locker room love Aaron Holiday so far. And I mean, I know he's not a flashy name, but he comes to work, and that's another option that you do have. It shouldn't surprise you if the box score every night is just different. Like, everybody should be able to go off on their own.
I was going to ask you about that. Do you view this team as having like enough secondary playmakers, guys who can actually set other players up aside from Dinwiddie and Beal? And what does that sort of inform about the type of role Aaron Holiday's playing, or how much they're relying on Raul Neto, who I've never viewed as, he had a great season last year. That guy wears other players' skins on defense.
He does.
But I've just never viewed him as like that table setter on offense. And so I'm curious as to where you land on like the structure there that they have of secondary offensive playmaking.
Yeah, it's gonna be a challenge because I do think, even when saying, like, it's extremely localized for me to be talking about how Neto did last year, did this, that, and the third. Like, people are going to be listening like, who? Like, what did Raul Neto do? Like, and like you said, he was probably one of the team's best defenders last year, which is crazy because I don't even think he's 6'2". Like, he's under 6'3". He's incredible. But seeing what they can do with playmaking outside of Brad and Spencer Dinwiddie on that bench is going to be interesting, because they have a log jam at the forward position, not the point guard position. Right. So that's going to be something Wes Unseld Jr. has to come up with on his own merit. That's a great question. That's a really good question. We'll have to see what that second unit does look like. And of course, you got staggering, and you can do all these different things with your starters. But that second unit, who runs that second unit? I mean, Raul has had history in doing so, but Raul is more of a scoring guard. Like, he's not more of a facilitating point guard. Aaron Holiday can play decent defense as well, but they're both kind of more like undersized combo guards to me. Right. And with a lean to the scoring department. So we'll have to see how that shakes out for them.
Deni Avdija, is he going to have any restrictions coming off that fractured foot? And he's also someone who, sandwiching that discussion together, I thought maybe, perhaps not immediately, but watching him, I know he didn't necessarily have the ball in his hands enough, but he felt like someone who might be able to step up and fill this void eventually for the Wizards as that secondary type of playmaker.
Yeah, it's crazy. I feel like I need to apologize. I keep forgetting about all the names on this team. Like, Deni is, when we talked to Wes the first day of training camp, what he brought up was Deni Avdija as a secondary ball handler. Like, and that's something that Deni was marketed as and has branded himself as since coming out of Maccabi Tel Aviv in the draft. And I think he is capable of that now. Health-wise, he looks good. He hasn't participated in any 5-on-5 with the players, with the guys out there, but he has been running 3-on-3s, 5-on-5s with coaching staffs and stuff like that. And he looks good. I talked to him the other day. I think you can probably expect him playing, if not the first preseason game against Houston, I think the second game against the New York Knicks. But he's good to go. I mean, his recovery has been good, and they expect a lot out of him, especially right now with what they saw out of him last year. Wes Unseld speaks highly of him, so he will have opportunities to become the secondary ball handler, especially with that second unit, something that fans wanted so much from him last year. Because it's funny, when they drafted him, a lot of fans were like, who is Deni Avdija? Like, especially not because of the fact that he was from overseas, but he was projected to go top 5. So for him to slide in the draft, Wizards fans weren't looking that high about guys like, oh, these guys are locked up. Let's see who are actually going to be projected to come to our team. And last year, you're like, oh, they drafted Deni. He's a playmaker. And then you get him, and then Scott Brooks sticks him in the corner and says, hey, you need to shoot threes all game, every game. And it's like, that's never what he's done. Like, you watch the film, even when you talk to Tommy Shepard, the GM, on draft night, he said he's a positionless basketball player. He can be that playmaker, and he never got that opportunity when Scott was here. So look for him this year to be able to do that. And also, they're going to lean him. They're going to, because of the depth, they're going to work these guys in slowly. Like, I feel like they feel comfortable, especially this year, slow walking a lot more of these guys due to injuries than they did last season.
It's good to know, because I was pleasantly, I get like shin deep into the draft, and then I'll do crash courses afterwards. Yeah. I was surprised at how like not terrible he was on defense last year too. And when you look at the forward depth, I was worried that maybe is he going to be someone coming off an injury, being only a sophomore. This team has like, I guess, semi-immediate expectations that could he get squeezed, but it sounds like what you're saying he won't be. And I think that's smart, because he just looks like there's going to be a really good basketball player in there soon, not already.
Absolutely. He was mad last year a lot because he got called for fouls, a lot of, especially on defense. And it was like, I think he has the potential to be a really good defender, but sometimes you're, hey, short end of the stick. You're a rookie. Like, this is just what happens. And also the position that you were kind of being expected to guard of his size, you've got some really wily veterans that are going to get those calls more often times than not. So this year is another year for him. He's definitely trying to decrease the fouling, and that's something that Russell Westbrook talked to him a lot about before he left. Didn't he even shout it out, Russell Westbrook, in his press conference last week, of just saying helping him become more mentally tough and also defend without fouling is two things that he's focused on this offseason.
I did see the Westbrook comment where if Westbrook influenced Deni Avdija's approach at all, that'll be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. That'd be really crazy to watch.
I didn't send this to you in the outline, but do you think this team should have taken a bigger swing than Kispert in the draft at number 15? Also sort of knowing, like, at that point, like, we knew what was happening with Russell Westbrook. Like, we knew what the Wizards were doing. To me, it felt like, yeah, maybe Kispert ends up being able to play a little bit more right away. But as you mentioned, the rotation where he should play will be really crowded at full strength. I'm just wondering if they should they have taken the project if it was like a Jalen Johnson, like the Hawks did, or even like an Usman Garuba, who I couldn't believe fell as far as he did. Guys who might not give you a return on investment as soon, but it felt like a very win now draft pick for a team that was veering away from any defined timeline.
Yeah, the biggest issue that they had last year was shooting. Like, the shooting was terrible. So that was the number one, I think, thing on their list was we need somebody that can shoot the ball, and Corey Kispert fit that mold. Another thing with Washington is that with Ted Leonsis and Tommy Shepard, they're really huge on image and off-court presence and just the ability to come in and be a professional. If you look at Corey Kispert, if you look at Deni Avdija, you look at Rui Hachimura, you kind of fit a mold of guys who, okay, their ceilings may not be as high as X player X, but they're never going to give you any issues off the floor, and you haven't heard anything about them negatively wise in terms of personality. With Jalen Johnson? I love Jalen Johnson. I thought his athleticism was crazy. I love that Atlanta picked him up. But with Jalen Johnson, I mean, it's hard to ignore the fact that people are like, did he quit on Duke? Like, he always has an issue everywhere he goes, and does he have an attitude problem? And with some organizations that are willing to say, hey, we can take a swing. I think he's talented. Bring him in this organization, and I don't care what happened prior to this position. We love you. We're going to take care of you. We're going to give you all the things that you need to succeed. And some organizations really succeed at that. Washington doesn't want to have to deal with that. I mean, especially I think something has to be said for like what happened with John Wall. Like, that kind of left a really bad taste in Ted Leonsis' mouth to where he's like, I don't want anything off the court to impact this team. Like, if we're going to lose or if we're going to win, it's going to be because, we did it with players that were available and just didn't, live up to the expectations or exceeded their expectations. But it's not going to be a guy that we have personality questions with off the court. So that eliminates, when you watch this Wizards team draft every year, You're like, man, I like Jalen Johnson, but what is there one negative thing about him? Oh yeah, he's probably not going to be in DC. Like that's just kind of where we are in terms of how they draft guys, and also they love foreign guys in DC. They love the Japanese market, the Israel market. Like they just love that to expand to different continents and countries and nations, and that's kind of what DC is. It's a huge melting pot, and that's I think another reason why you go with Deni and Rui in the draft, and Corey Kispert, of course, is Corey Kispert, but
the shooting is a good point too. In someone who can move off the ball.
Yeah.
This team, you've already mentioned the defensive problems they had. It's still so weird. They finished outside of garbage time 16th in points allowed per possession. I think that was inflated by how the season sort of ended for them.
Yeah.
Is the defense going to be better this year? And what was the inflation due to? Like they did a good job. The opponents didn't get a ton of shots to the rim last year, but they were finishing at will once they did get there. It was just such a oddball defensive team that I thought was bad. And then you look at the standing and it's like they were around league average. I don't know what to make of that.
Size. Scott Brooks ran a lot of 3-guard and 4-guard lineups last year. Like we talked to Raul Neto last Thursday, and Raul Neto said the obvious. I'm a point guard. And last year I played the 2, the 3, and sometimes the 4. Now, I don't know how many teams are playing Raul Neto at the forward, at the 4. It's ridiculous. And those were things. They also had Ish Smith. You had Ish Smith, Raul Neto, and Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal all on the floor sometimes at the same time. Brad is 6'3". Russ is 6'2", 6'3". Ish Smith is 6'1", and Raul Neto is 6'2". You can't, defensive-wise, think that you can stop a team on a consistent basis with 3-guard lineups, especially when they're that size. Typically, if you're going to go with 3-guard lineup, you want to go with more positionless guys that have some type of size where they bring an expertise in a set area. And that's not what they had last year. So I think with this year, you do get a bigger team. Starting with the point guard position, you got a big guard in Spencer Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie's what, 6'5", 6'6"?
Yeah.
Like he's big guard, and not that he's been like this lockdown defender all his life, but it's a different, even when John was here, John is 6'3". Like it's a different feel at the point guard position when you have a bigger guard. Also Bradley Beal's defense has to improve. Like this is something that is just known. Like when it's easy to talk about your lapses on defense when you have to do everything offensively. You kind of get a pass in that department, and which is a lot of reason why people like want to give Brad this respect, but then other fans and analysts are saying, well, Brad doesn't play any defense. Well, Brad plays 40 minutes, and he's the reason why they had like 100 of these points. Like he's 90% of the reason why y'all have even scored 80. So his defense has to get better. And I think all those things kind of come to fruition when you bring in Wes Unseld Jr., who does recognize the flaws on defense. I don't think you're going to see many 3-guard lineups for Wes Unseld Jr. this year. And I think the switchiness, you're eliminating that, and you do just have more talented defenders. Just baseline, and I think that should be able to shoot them up that ranking a little bit.
I am contractually obligated to ask about Bradley Beal's future.
Yeah.
It does feel like, ever since the report came out that Russ tried to get Bradley Beal to request a trade as well, which, by the way, Russ might be the worst star recruiter in the league. He tried to team up with Kawhi, and then Kawhi stole Paul George from Oklahoma City. Now he tries to get Bradley Beal to leave Washington, and that doesn't work out. But it feels like, if Bradley Beal decided to stay with this team through that, it just feels like the noise is not as loud. But is this still a fluid situation given he is entering a contract year? Or do you expect him to sign an extension? Or is this just I guess the question is, how likely is Bradley Beal to be wearing a Wizards jersey after this coming season?
Can I say yes to every question you just asked? Because I think all of those things can be true. I think it is still a very fluid situation. Like he wants to win games. And if you're an organization that shows that you're not making strides to win, then that makes Brad look at the organization a little differently. Now, he said on record a few times and off the record, well, I can't say what he said off the record, but he has said in just conversation that, he wants to retire a Washington Wizard. He wants that jersey hung up in the Raptors and to be there for a long time. They're the team that drafted him on his birthday. It was a huge deal for him, and that's his life now. And they offered him the extension, which we all knew they would last weekend, last Friday, last Thursday. But that's going to sit there for a little bit, I believe. I think that's going to sit there until he feels as though we're moving in the right direction. Now, on paper, this team looks better than last year. But I feel like we've said that about this team every single season that Brad's been here. It's like this team looks better, and you're still, fighting to get the AC. You're in the play-in situation. You're in the play-in scenario. I think realistically, you want to look at this team and say, okay, can we not play the best team in the playoffs, round one, can we be a 5 seed? Can we be a 4 seed? Can we be a top 3 seed? I think those are very lofty expectations, but that's what the type of player Brad is the type of team he wants to have. He wants that to be matched. And I think him and Dame, major kudos to both of those guys. Like, they're a different breed. They're so loyal, but the noise that you hear now from the Dame side, and who's extremely candid about what he feels in terms of his future in Portland, it's the same thing with Brad. Brad wants to be here, but he is not rushing to sign anything because of the fact that you have to know that you're making the right decision. And you can get a lot of money everywhere now. Like, that's the thing. You can get a lot of money everywhere. If you can get a lot of money and win, great. That's what you want to do. And if you can do that at home, excellent. But so far, they have to prove that they're building a team around him. And Russ was a big swing, and it kind of hurt Brad a little bit because John was his dog. And then you have the season where everybody's down with COVID and Dobby shows up out of shape, and it's just a weird season. But I think all the things you can say, it's a fluid situation. Do I expect him to sign? Yes. Is it fluid? Yes. Do I expect him to take his time? Yes. Do I expect him to possibly look and take meetings at some point in time with other teams? Absolutely. I expect all those things from Brad because you have to at this point.
If you're him and you're looking at this team, can it be all about this season? Like, if let's say the Wizards are just like 10th or something around the trade deadline and they don't have a clear path to moving up, well, is he the type of player that might look at what they're building and say, I can at least see the vision here? Because, like, even if they have their best season, they're not going to be a championship contender,
right?
And so I'm wondering how that the long term sort of factors in with this. He is getting a little older based on NBA years. That how he sort of needs to weigh that.
It's crazy how he's in year 10 and he's 27. Like,
he's getting older. Yeah, he's 27. But
yeah, that's crazy. And he's the oldest guy on the team. Like, that's another thing we don't talk. Like, he's the vet and he's 27 years old. But I think, yeah, I mean, it has to be. If I were him, I would look and say, okay, well, we have better players than we had last year. I think they're starting to realize what we need and address those needs. A new coach also, I feel like, buys you a little more time. If you're the Wizards and you're looking at him saying, okay, well, what can Wes do in year one? How do I like Wes Unseld Jr.? I think the relationship with Scott Brooks for a lot of players kind of soured, not negatively, but just you get a little used to playing under a certain coach and you're not really being challenged and you're not hearing a different voice. So you bring in a different voice and you bring in you flip Russell for all these different pieces. KCP and him are really, really tight, best friends. Like, that's a really big deal to him to play with somebody. I think that even adds a little, like, that's a little addition to the time on Bradley Beal, is playing with a guy who now is your best friend. That's something that he can get behind and staying in DC. But if they're 10th around the trade deadline, I'm going to have a lot to write about, I feel like, because that is going to be very disappointing on all fronts. You can never predict injuries or anything like that. But, yeah, I don't think anything's off the table if you're 10th at that point. Do you cut some slack to the roster age, or do you cut some slack to the first-year head coach? Or you're like, man, this is a swing, and I thought we had something, but I don't think these guys can really play, and, it might be time for me to take my talents elsewhere.
That gets really interesting if they all of a sudden are moving him with a half season essentially left on his deal rather than, 2 seasons or a season.
Yeah, it's a tricky game they're playing.
We've reached the cookie cutter portion of the podcast where I ask this on every single look ahead. And this is matchup based, this question I know, but if you had to pick, what do you think ends up being their most used or most effective crunch time unit with this roster?
Spencer Dinwiddie, Bradley Beal, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope at the 3. KCP is going to start this year. I don't think a lot of people realize that. KCP is going to start. At the 4, I would love to say Rui. And then at the 5, Daniel Gafford. But it wouldn't surprise me if it's Kuz at the 4. Also, Kuz brings a little more shooting at the 4 position. Sure. Not that he's an excellent 3-point shooter, but he's a scorer. He's more of a scorer, and he's more apt to go and get a bucket than Rui is at this point in his career. So probably say Spence, Brad, KCP, Kuz, and Daniel Gafford.
Are those basically like 4 starters, and then the 4 is going to be very like malleable? Like, would you expect Rui to start if he's with the team and ready to go?
I would. Okay. Now, if Rui shows up, after preseason, he's not going to start. Like, I just know Wes. That's not the kind of guy Wes is, where you can just come into camp and now be thrown into the fire like that. So he's going to have to work for that, especially because Kuz has been working his butt off too. But also the 5 position is also kind of up in the air because I think Daniel Gafford is the starter. But what they had in Thomas Bryant, it's very consistent. I mean, he led the league in field goal percentage from inside the paint at one point or a couple years ago. He's extremely efficient. He can stretch the floor, and it's kind of like, what do you need? Because you love stretch bigs, but also you need some defense. And Daniel Gafford brings more defense than Thomas Bryant does. But Thomas Bryant's also working back from an injury. But I would agree, 4 starters in a transition, a fluid situation at the 4.
Is there a quirky, out of left field, weird lineup that you think this team needs to try? Just, it doesn't even necessarily have to be good, just to see what would happen, to see what it might be.
Yeah, I would probably go. Let's go Spence at the 1. Actually, you know what? Let's go. Yeah, Spence at the 1, but at the 2, Corey Kispert, slide Brad down to the 3. Davis Bertans at the 4, and then at the 5, when healthy, Thomas Bryant. Now, I don't know how much defense is getting played in that lineup, but I know that lineup can run. That lineup can score like crazy. That I feel like, you have like a nitro or a turbo package in football where you got all your pass rushers out there for a third and long situation. I feel like that's like a high scoring lineup I see that Washington could throw out there and really put some pressure on some defense. Kispert has been so impressive in training camp. Like, a lot of people have had questions about other players, but the most consistent thing that you've heard across from players and coaches that Kispert's ready right now. Like, Kispert, not only does he shoot the ball well, he has a little bit of a low delivery on his jumper, but it's still butter. He hustles so hard. His defense is very obvious. He doesn't cut any corners. So you're going to see a lot of minutes from Corey Kispert. Now, Wes is going to have to find them somehow for court, but he's going to get a lot of playing time this year, and he's ready for it seems.
I agree that lineup should get buckets. I would also agree that I think they would give up a lot of buckets too.
Absolutely.
I think the one I would want to see, because I am an endless lobbyist for small ball lineups, and I want to see Spencer, Beal, KCP, Deni, and then Kuzma. Like, let's just roll out Beal and Dinwiddie and all the wings and see what happens. I don't think that lineup defends particularly well either, but it spares Neto from locking minutes at the 5. So we don't have to stake Neto at the 5 in that situation.
I do. If I see Neto play a second outside of the 2 guard, I'm throwing my TV out the window. No, I do not want to see it anymore. Obviously, and I love Neto. Neto can defend his butt off. Like, he can really defend. Last year, he had he's been good since he's been in DC. Had an injury late to him. I think he sprained his ankle late last season, and his production kind of decreased. And at the same time, Ish Smith started getting buckets out of nowhere, and then the last year too. But Neto's solid, man. I really like him.
And I apologize for sending you a typo in your outline, but their over-under is set at 34.5. Would you take the over-under on that, and where do you see them stacking up in the larger picture of the East?
I would take the over. I would. I honestly would, because of the fact that they are a group that knows how to play basketball. Like, it's less youth. I mean, it's still young, but it's less youth, if that makes sense. Like, you've got young guys who have done things and have expectations, and everybody feels like they know that this is something that we can really compete with. I think, if anything, a lot of people have asked me, like, Quinn, this roster, 6 seed, like, we're no longer the 8 seed. I think we can be 6 or 5. But the only thing that I'm challenged with is that the rest of the East has actually gotten really good. Like I think they can have a significantly better season than they did last year and still be around the 7. Like, I just think the East is that good this year. And then I look at the West. The West is kind of more open because you have so many injuries. The East is pretty loaded this year on paper. I mean, Chicago, you got names like, we look at the Knicks, even though I don't love Evan Fournier, they've got a point guard in Kemba. And then you look at all these different teams where I think they can easily creep up on, like, mid 40s in the win total, but still be around the same position that they were last season. So we'll see. And now every year there's an injury to a certain player or a certain team that, one team unexpectedly drops and one unexpected team jumps up in the standings. I think they can be in the middle of the pack this year. I don't expect them to be like a top 3 or 4 seed, but I think realistically, 6, 7, 8 is probably where they'll fit. But if they can get 5, 6, I think that's a win for the organization.
I think you hit the problem with the East head on, which is just that I think there'll be a clear-cut pecking order in the top 4, even though right now it feels like Milwaukee and Brooklyn than everyone else. Yeah. I think Atlanta belongs in the top 4 and then maybe Miami. But I think 4 teams will, they'll establish themselves. But everyone, like 5, there could be 5 through 11 of interchangeable teams. Yeah. And I think that's what makes it tough to peg where the Wizards fall. I'm curious as to why the over-under on them is so low. I'm guessing it's just the combustible potential of what does happen with Bradley Beal. Because if you do decide to move him, like, no, you're not winning 35 games this season.
Exactly. I don't care how many guys you have out there. You're not winning without Brad. It's going to be something interesting because, like, we previewed on my show, we previewed the Pacers last week, and it's like, oh, the Pacers have all solid guys like they typically do. All these guys that can get buckets, but then they got Rick Carlisle. Like, I think Rick Carlisle is going to bring something to that team that, you know, is going to be a little different than what we've seen in years past. The Celtics are a tricky team to me too because Jason Tatum is healthy, Jaylen Brown is healthy, Marcus Smart is going to be the starting point guard. There's still much to desire at that center position. Like, they're kind of a question mark too. Now, I think last year they were a 7 seed, but a lot of these teams are interesting. Charlotte just keeps getting better, and they're younger, they're exciting. LaMelo's probably going to play the rest of this. Hopefully he stays healthy this season. Miami as well gets Kyle Lowry. It's just going to be so many.
What the hell is Chicago? Is what I'm still trying to figure out.
What is Chicago on paper? Because are they going to defend? Like, they might defend because they have nice perimeter defenders, but then Vooch is down low. I don't know. Like, Chicago to me feels like a team that coming into the offseason we're excited about, but something will go wrong. Like, something just feels like it's going to go wrong there in Chicago. I don't know why, but that feels like one of those teams to me. And also New York, I hated the Evan Fournier pickup. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not huge on Evan Fournier. Maybe that's just me, but I didn't see how. I mean, he's a scorer, and that's awesome, but I don't like the Evan Fournier pickup. Kemba's passable to me, but Evan Fournier was a head scratcher.
I mean, Kemba at that price point is certainly passable. That's take the flyer, move on. Yeah. That's fine. I was with you in the general sense of I get why they leaned so much into getting shot makers this offseason because of how that Atlanta series went. But you let your best perimeter defender walk. What leverage did Evan Fournier have that he needed to get that third guaranteed year?
Like, what the heck?
And I know it's a small sample size, but that might say a lot about Evan Fournier. But his postseasons have been largely unspectacular. So I'm with you there. Is there anything or anyone on this team that I did not ask you about that you think needs to be covered?
Montrezl Harrell. I don't expect Montrezl to go out here and be 6th man of the year or anything like that. But the toughness the reason they elected to get Montrezl is because he can bring a toughness that I don't think they've had. Like, they haven't had really like any riders. Like, if Brad gets roughed up, you know, who's coming to Brad's defense? Rui? Like, you know what I'm saying? Rui's not like Davies is a mean Latvian. Like, he does not play around, but you need somebody that's going to come and instill that physicality, especially on defense, and take some flagrants, take some and have some identity about them. I feel like the last time this team had that was Markieff Morris back in those death row DC days. And if you don't know what that is, I don't blame you because that is another extremely localized Washington Wizards fan thing. But I think Montrezl also pushes the younger guys to be tougher. Like, he's gonna bang around with Rui. Rui is gonna have to assert himself if he wants to practice with this team. I think Montrezl does definitely bring a different attitude to the locker room that I think would be advantageous to them.
You mentioned Montrezl Harrell, which makes me realize I forgot to ask this question. Who do you view as the most likely player to be traded on this roster heading into the season?
Man, probably Kuz.
Really? That's interesting.
Probably Kuz. Not that Washington doesn't like him, but if you're a team that's calling about somebody, it would probably be between Kuz and KCP. Like, you're looking at guys who have been there before, who have had a track record of playing winning basketball, have had experience in the playoffs. You want somebody, especially if you're an elite team, you wanted somebody who can come in and not shy away from that spotlight. Now, I think Washington views Kuz extremely, extremely high and think there's a lot of untapped potential there. But you might be able to get something for Kyle Kuzma at the trade deadline if things fall apart and you have to start unloading ships. So I think probably Kuz or it's a toss-up between the Lakers guys. They're all Lakers. Kuz, KCP, and Montrezl.
I guess I looked at it from the view of they would be buyers because of what they're trying to do. So I just viewed Harrell's salary, that expiring contract to match it. Yeah. But what you bring up is a really salient point. If they're willing to prioritize the bigger picture, I think KCP and Kuzma, aside from Beal, obviously, are going to generate the most interest on the roster. And they're much easier to part with than Bradley Beal because that's a directional decision on your entire franchise.
Yes, absolutely. I didn't even think of it from your point of view. That's a good point as well. Trez's contract is right there. And Trez kind of feels like, sometimes he feels like the odd man out. I mean, because we talk about Thomas Bryant and we talk about Daniel Gafford, because we've seen them in DC. But Trez is like a tweener guy. Like, he's not your back to the basket big. He's not like an elite defender. But he has a force out there on the floor. And I think a lot of teams could use a guy like Trez as well.
Quinton, thank you so much for speaking with me. Are you able to
Not a
tell our
problem.
listeners where they can find you on social media and all the great work that you do?
Follow me on social media at Real Quinton Mayo. I also host a show for Odyssey. It's Bet MGM Tonight. It's actually a live sports gambling show from 7 to 11 p.m. Eastern time. So you guys can tune in on that. And for the Wizards season, I cover the team also for Odyssey and Blue Wire. So you can check me out at Blue Wire Pods, the Quinton Mayo podcast, and also stream live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Quinton Mayo. So any Wizards content, we also do a lot of NBA stuff as well on our noon streams, and just go back and watch all the games and laugh at Dwight Howard fouling out in preseason, stuff like that.
I commend you for watching preseason NBA basketball at all.
Oh, I saw one clip and that's it. So we'll probably watch it a couple days from now.
Quinton, you do a lot of work and you do it extremely well. So thank you for giving me so much of your time, and rest assured I will be pestering you again in the future.
Not a problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.